So now, finally, I want to talk about the very personal Mandela effect that I brought. It's one to do with geography, very similar actually to the New Zealand, Australia Mandela effect that I brought up earlier.
Okay.
The personal Mandela effect that I want to talk about is something I experienced when I was in infant school. This is the late 1990s. I must have been 6 or 7 and I was in infant school. And I remember seeing a big world map. It took up a lot of the wall, might have even been the size of the entire wall. Think of the size of a whiteboard. It was that, but a world map.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Took up the majority of the wall. And I remember being fascinated by this map because it kind of puts into perspective just how big the world actually is.
Yeah.
And it used to freak me out when my teacher would point at England on the map and say, that's where we are now. And it freaked me out how small we were compared to some of the other land masses. And in fact, I remember this map specifically because I could see right down at the bottom, there were a couple of places in the world that made me laugh. One was called Sandwich Islands and the other was called Shag Rocks.
Of course that made you laugh.
And that made 6-7-year-old me laugh.
You should have known what that meant back then.
Well, I did. The thing about this map that I consider to be a Mandela effect, and it seems other people do too, is when you think of the continents in this world, what continents do you think of?
Africa, America, Asia. How many continents are there?
So there's 7.
Africa, Asia,
North America, South America.
North America, South America.
Yeah.
Australia.
Yep.
And Mexico.
Nope.
No.
Antarctica.
Antarctica. Yeah.
And we all know where they are, where they're located. Now, when I was looking at this world map, Antarctica was very clear. You could see at the bottom of the world, there was this big white strip across the bottom of the world map. And it said Antarctica on it. And I remember seeing that and being fascinated, thinking that, you know, there's this place in the world that's just snow and ice. And I loved the snow. So I remember thinking that's really a cool place. It's somewhere I want to go one day. I also remember at the very, very top of this world map, there being a similar strip that goes all the way along the top of the map. And it was called Arctica. And I remember this specifically because I remember looking at Arctica at the top of the planet. And I remember looking at Antarctica at the bottom of the planet. And that is what taught me that anti or ant usually means other way. Or
right, okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Like anti-clockwise.
Yeah. So to me, it was Arctica at the top. What's the reverse of Arctica? Antarctica.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I remember that specifically.
Yeah.
Now, I also remember at the same time, in that same classroom, we had a globe, a physical globe that you could pick up and spin. And
yeah, the ones that was it one of those that's on the holder? Or
yeah, it was on a holder. And you could spin it, you could pick the holder up and whatever. And I could see at the bottom of the globe, it had Antarctica. And I could see that the majority of the bottom, or quite a lot of the bottom of the planet was snow and ice. When I looked at the top of the planet, where the top of the holder met the globe, there was nothing there. And that's why I remember Arctica, because I remember looking at the world map and seeing Arctica, and then looking at the globe and there being nothing there. Now, I also remember trying to justify it to myself in a couple of ways. The first was that there was a white landmass near the top of the globe, but it wasn't at the top, and it was Greenland.
Right, okay.
And I remember thinking, does Greenland somehow convert when the map is flattened out? Does that somehow convert to this big white landmass that I've seen at the top of the world map on the wall? Until I saw that Greenland was also on the world map on the wall. So to me, that didn't make sense. I also remember trying to justify it to myself by thinking the bit on the top of the globe where the holder is holding the globe, is Arctica under that? Is it just hidden by this bit that connects to the globe itself?
Yeah.
So that is how I remember Arctica. And to me, Arctica was a continent.
Okay.
It's always been a continent. It's only when I got to secondary school and we started doing geography, you get asked, what are the continents? And you have to go through the continents, kind of like we've just done. And, you know, we would say Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Europe, Australia, Antarctica. And then one day I said Arctica, and I got told categorically, no, that's not a continent. Never heard of it. That's just not a thing that exists. And since then, I'd convinced myself I must be wrong. Nobody else around me seems to remember Arctica. And as a 6-7-year-old, you would never point that out and go, what is that? Explain that to me. What is that doing there on that book?
Why is it there and not here?
Yeah. You would just kind of justify that, it must be Greenland. And Greenland, when it's flattened out, is at the top of the globe or whatever. But looking online, a lot of other people have actually reported similar things. They remember Arctica growing up. So there's a post by somebody called Matt Ziller on the Mandela Effect Reddit, and he's created a post called Arctica is not on the maps anymore. And he says, does anyone remember there being an actual North Polar ice cap at the top of the globe? I definitely remember the maps in elementary school and in junior high. There was a polar ice cap and it was called Arctica. I remember taking tests and having to make mental notes when studying the locations between Antarctica and Arctica. I never remembered it to just be a bunch of glaciers moving around. There was 100% a North Polar ice caps similar to Antarctica. Where did the North Pole stem from then? Santa Claus didn't sail around between glaciers at the top of the world. So there's a couple of things there. I mean, first off, the North Pole, that's just Lapland, isn't it? And then that in Greenland.
No, North Pole is in the Arctic Ocean.
Yeah, so when we're talking like magnetic north, the North Pole, the South Pole and whatever, it would be, the north part of it would be where these glaciers are. But the glaciers aren't shown on most maps. And also the landmass that I saw was fucking huge. And it specifically said Arctica. That's how I knew what it was called.
Well, there's an Arctic Circle.
Yeah. Where did Arctica come from? As a child, I would have just called it North Pole and Antarctica, or South Pole and North Pole.
The Arctic from ancient Greek is the polar region of Earth that surrounds the North Pole, lying within the Arctic Circle. So this is saying that the Arctic ice is melting. That's why it's no longer there.
The landmass I saw, if all of that was to melt and disappear, it would be the end of the world. It was a huge landmass. It was a continent. If a continent was just to disappear into the sea through melting or whatever, it would be disaster. So that's the thing. There are some people that say the ice caps are sometimes captured on maps. And I've seen the ice caps on maps from the 90s shown now at the top. And they look nothing like I remember. I even remember looking at the world map on the wall and thinking, well, how can I go from left on the map and appear on the right? How can I go through America and end up over near where Japan is and that kind of thing? And I remember one of the ways I visually looked at the map in my head was folding it so that the northern part of the map, where Arctica is, met Antarctica.
Yeah.
And I knew that didn't make sense, even as a child, because that would mean that the North Pole and South Pole are touching. So I knew that wasn't the way the map would fold. It would fold from left to right, if anything.
Is there any chance that it did melt?
Well,
because the Arctic Ocean is there, and it's exactly where you thought it was.
Now, I have found a Kansas City Journal article from July 1912, and it says there is no such separate continent at the north. The polar regions there are united with North America and Asia, so that is incorrect to refer to a continent called Arctica in 1912.
But I'm not saying it's a continent. I'm not saying anything like that. What I'm saying is there any way that this place did exist and it's melted down through the years, and that's why it's no longer on maps?
The only way that what you just said would make sense is if in 1912 this continent didn't exist and then came back and then disappeared again. Now, there is no landmass at the north. It's just ice, which is why at the very northernmost part of the world, the thing that you can walk on there, you can also sail under. It's just a floating thing. So that freaks me out because I remember Arctica vividly. And when I was told there's no such thing as Arctica, the only thing that's made me doubt that is the fact that nobody around me remembers it.
Yeah.
So I put it down to a false memory. I must have somehow been thinking of Greenland. I remember these things in my head. Maybe, it's been almost 30 years at this point. So maybe I've misremembered it. And it's only when I've looked online at Mandela Effect that other people have also said, I remember Arctica, and I remember it through the maps that I saw as a child.
Okay.
That's why that Mandela effect is very personal to me.